We got our seats, we good? Okay, everybody. Hello, I'm Kelsey. I recognize a couple of you guys from the mental health and the Christian workshop. Glad to see you guys again, and new people. Can't wait. Good, it's set up now. We're going to begin with me breaking something. We're going to begin with a breathing exercise that I led people through on Thursday, and we're going to do it again. So you put a hand on your chest, doesn't matter which hand, and then you put the other hand on your tummy, and we're going to breathe in through our nose for 4 seconds. Then we're going to hold for 7, and then we're going to let out for 8 through our mouth, pursed lips like a straw. That's how we're going to make it go so long, okay? So let's take a moment. And while we do this, Eric, could you close that door? Because I'm sure they're having a lovely time, but this is not easy to do when you hear screaming. Thank you. Then you can join us. So let's take a moment. You can close your eyes if you want. Can you feel your heartbeat? If you cleared your throat, could you feel that? I can. Good. So we're going to breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 7, out for 8. In 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One more time. In 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I will open us up in prayer, and you can have your eyes closed or open, whatever you want. Jesus, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for intercession that's been going on. Please be in our conversations, both here and the rest of the week. Thank you for loving us, and please make this presentation start working. Amen. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Okay, so hello, everyone. I'm Kelsey Regan. A couple things. That looks very different from down there. Good. A couple things about me that might be helpful to know as we start this very bizarre conversation. Well, first, not about me. First off, you've got bubbles. Please use them. The only caveat is please don't let them be distracting to yourself or the people surrounding. So, for example, my very best friend, what's your name? Sarah. So if I'm sitting next to Sarah and I'm thinking, this is so great, and just and she's whacking them away. That is very distracting for you guys, but also more importantly me, because it was my idea to bring bubbles. I love playing with them. If I'm seeing people having a bubble fight, I'm gonna have a really hard time paying attention because you're bringing out the inner kid in me. It's like, no. So please do yourself and me a bit of a solid. Use your bubbles, but teach them the meaning of subtlety and teach them how to respect personal space. Okay? So. That being said, if there's a constant stream of bubbles, I'll be so happy. Couple things about me. I am 28. I go to Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. I'm getting my master's, and I'm researching self-harm. After I graduate in May, I'm going to be going to Trinity School for Ministry and get my doctorate so I can train priests and counselors about this sort of thing. Other things that are very important to know. I have 2 cats. That won't come into play at all, but I think it's very important that people know that I have 2 cats, Rosie and Mercy, and they helped me wake up on time this morning. I was very grateful. I was worried about it, and 7 o'clock, boom, wake up. Other things to know. I think that's it for this slide. Oh, yeah, here we go. So my research with self-harm started with me. Growing up, I grew up in a very loving home, but my family didn't know how to talk about most things uncomfortable. They didn't know how to talk about addiction or depression or anxiety. And so when I was 16 and finally diagnosed with depression, what I didn't know is it was hereditary. There's 2 different kinds of depression. There's the kind you're born with, And then there's the kind that happens to you. So like if something happens and you're like, I can't get out of it, I'm just in this funk, that's more the situational. But some people are born with a tendency towards depression. And you can sort of see that if you know much about your family history. I didn't know the family history because they didn't talk about the history. And part of it was because they didn't know about the family history. And so growing up, I had no idea that I was kind of genetically predisposed to have depression and anxiety and addiction and other things like that. And I didn't find out it ran in the family until college. So about 2023, I'm like, wait a minute, this explains so much. But I didn't have those tools growing up. And so when I was 14 years old, a freshman in high school, everything just became too much. I didn't have any tools to talk about things, and we'll get into that later, and I tried to kill myself. I was 14, 2 suicide attempts in one weekend. They all failed, obviously, and I was very mad about it. And a couple weeks later, I became a Christian and thought, oh, good, like what they say about being a Christian, everything should be better now, and it wasn't because I didn't know. I was genetically predisposed. I didn't have any new coping mechanisms other than I believe there was a God, which is a great first step. But things kind of spiraled and went worse. And so instead of suicide, I started to have an eating disorder. I was anorexic sophomore year. And then junior year, I started to cut and burn and self-harm. And we'll talk a bit more about the particulars in there, but the main thing is 16 to 19, I was constantly hurting myself intentionally. And until I was 19, I went too far, and I put myself into a wheelchair. And it was an accident. I thought I was in control, but suddenly I couldn't stand, and I couldn't walk. And my leg was hurting in this way that I didn't do that. What on earth is going on? And 4 physical therapists, and 5 years after that, I was able to walk without collapsing. I started walking almost immediately, but it was incredibly physically painful. And I had this huge limp. I still limp. I've been clean for just about 10 years. This March will be my 10-year anniversary of being self-harm free, and I still limp a little because the muscle damage I accidentally did during my intentional self-harming days caused lasting damage, and then just bad walking habits. It's hard to detect because I bounce a lot and I'm so full of caffeine, but because of these things, I care an awful lot about self-harm. Especially because when I was your age, I was trying to figure out, why am I doing this? Why is this happening? And there weren't any really resources out there, and there still aren't. So I'm changing that, and part of the Orange Lily Project, which is this thing I formed, someday it will be known, I'm going to be writing a workbook for people your age and my age, but also for middle schoolers, so that, much of what I'm going to be talking about here and much about what I talked about in the workshop on Thursday will be easily accessible. And I'm doing it because I didn't have the access, and I got seriously hurt. My fault, but seriously hurt, and I didn't have to be. So here's a couple of things about what we will not be doing during this talk. We will not be showing any graphic images. There is a spot of red. It looks like blood. It's actually iodine. The picture will make sense. We won't be doing any graphic motion. So I will not be doing slicing motions on an arm or a leg. And I'll explain why about neurotransmitters and triggers. But for now, we're not going to be showing anything graphic. We're not going to be acting anything graphic. And that's very important for later because we're not going to try and figure out if anyone in this room is also a self-harmer. And notice how I'm sort of using the present. I have not hurt myself intentionally for almost 10 years, but I still identify as a self-harmer. Recovering, but I'm not going to try to find anybody else in the room. And you guys shouldn't either. For now, and we're not going to name call, we're not going to condemn or condone, we're just going to be talking about this stuff. And instead of trying to figure out who people are or whatever, what we are going to presume about everyone in the room is that there is a self-harmer in your life, and you care about your friends. That's what we're going to presume about everyone in this room. If you have a question, you don't have to worry about, oh no, will they suspect, there's a teacher here, will they suspect no, we're not. You can say, well, a friend told me, I read online, I read a book, what about this generic thing? It's okay, you can ask any kind of question. And people who were here for the Thursday talk, you might disagree. I like to think I'm kind of fun and lighthearted in my general tone. I don't know, maybe you were bored to tears, but you came back. Maybe you didn't know it was me. But I'm going to try to make this interesting and engaging, but I'm not making fun of this. Like, this is something that almost killed me. So I am not making fun of it. I am not saying, oh, it's not a big deal. I still limp. It's a really big deal. But I'm not going to spend the entire thing preaching death, doom, gloom, destruction, etc., because the topic is already hard enough. So, we will open the floor for general questions in a second, but first we need to understand what is self-harm. At the moment, there's not really a set definition for what this thing is, because there's such a wide spectrum. When you hear the term self-harm, just shout it out. What are some things you think of?
Cutting.
Cutting, yes. Mm-hmm. Anything else?
Burning.
Burning, yes, very good. Any others that instinctively come to mind? No? Okay. Cutting and burning are the two most common. There's also things like, and this isn't to give you an idea, this is just to illustrate, things like pulling out your hair, or hitting yourself, or in severe cases, digesting things that will cause physical pain and destruction, or in incredibly serious cases, small amputations. Those ones are a bit more rare, but there's this big wide spectrum, and more people are inclined to be like, what do you mean you're cutting yourself versus, oh, you're pulling out hair? Well, they all fit on the spectrum because, so there's no set definition, so I made one up, fight me. To qualify as self-harm, I say, there must be three things present at all times. First is there needs to be the presence of intentional pain. Like, most of the point of the action is it will hurt. There are things we do that also hurts, and it's unpleasant, and we get through it, but the point of self-harm is the pain. An injury or bleeding or a lasting mark does not have to count. I've still got scars that are visible to the naked eye on my limbs, but I've also done self-harm that left no mark at all. The point for me was the pain. Two, the intentional pain needs to be a coping or expression mechanism, a coping mechanism or a form of expression. You're going through something that it's internal or external, but the way you are responding to it is to seek out pain. This is different from an autistic child who bangs their head on the wall. That's different. They're overstimulated, they don't know what to do, bam, bam, bam. That's different from when you feel so angry you're about to explode, burn, or whatever. It's also different from like a schizophrenic who picks at themselves compulsively. That's different. So intentional pain, emotional coping or expression. Then as a result of the pain, you feel a sense of relief. We'll explain the science of why right now. When you self-harm, something that happens, well, when you get injured at all, something that happens is your brain releases endorphins. This is one of the things that makes us different from animals, where if an animal breaks its leg, it's very possibly going to go into shock and die. When we break a leg or something, we scream, we swear, we hurt, we cry, but we're probably not going to go into shock. And one of the reasons is because our brain has a bunch of sort of firewalls in place, and one of them being it releases endorphins to help your brain calm down. And self-harmers have learned to manipulate that chemical discharge so that when they intentionally harm themselves, their brain releases a bit of endorphins, and so that gives them it kind of gives you the sensation of being high. And so from that, you feel a bit of relief. And there is another factor to the relief, which I will explain shortly. Those three things, the presence of pain, the emotional coping expression, and the emotional relief, that is what I say must be present at all times, all three, to be self-harm. And then I consider someone a self-harmer if they do it more than once. So I know someone who cut themselves one time, and later they came up to me and was like, I don't know how you did it more than once. I did it once. I'm like, no, never again. And it's like, okay, well, you're not a self-harmer. You self-harmed the one time, but in a sense, but it didn't work. You didn't feel emotional relief. You didn't repeat it. Now, there are some addictive things. So self-harm is an addiction. It doesn't start that way, but it is in the midst of addiction. And not all addictions are self-harm. Sort of like cookies are pastries, but not all pastries are cookies. And so there are some addictive things that we're probably a bit more familiar with that we're like, well, does this count because it's got some of those factors? So like drugs, taking drugs, shooting heroin or something. And I apologize for some of the language I use. I don't know the terminology beyond what I know. So it's like doing the drugs. I don't know. But so you inject the needle and that hurts. But you're after the drug. The pain is just something you got to deal with, and to a point you don't even notice it. So because, in the pursuit of the drugs, which might be coping, you might feel relief, but you're not after the pain. So therefore, doing drugs, it's not self-harm. It is harmful to the self, but it does not fall under the spectrum of self-harm. An eating disorder, when I present these caveats, I know people, like I myself was anorexic growing up, I know a number of people who identified as self-harmers because of their eating disorder. They said it wasn't about the food, it's the hunger pains. I felt like I was coping whenever my stomach was like, feed me, and I said no. So there was the pain, they were expressing, and they felt relief every time they skipped a meal because it hurt. I'm like, okay, that does count. There are others who don't eat because of a different thing, and they don't like the hunger pains. That doesn't count. It's this weird little, it's this strange tightrope, but for the sake of argument here, for self-harm, you need those three. To be a self-harmer, you need to have done it more than once. And was that all I had to say about that? Yes. I'll sometimes use language interchangeably. I'll say self-harm, cutting, burning. I don't really list off the other things because I didn't do them myself. But we mean, when I say cutting, I mean blah, 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 including blah, 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 blah. I gave a lecture about this earlier. Someone asked me about the tongue. Is she here today? I'll get there in a second. Okay, rats. I was hoping she would be. So one of the negative stigmas that happens a lot when it comes to mental health is we say it's all in your head, it's all in your mind, don't worry about it, just focus on God or just focus on your body. Your brain doesn't matter. Well, your brain is an organ, and it's the one thing that cannot be replaced or transplanted. I asked about a tongue. A student on Thursday said, what about the tongue? Can it be replaced? I looked it up. There was a successful tongue transplant in Austria in 2003 by Dr. Ewer. So the brain is the only thing that cannot be transplanted. It can't grow back. It can't be replaced. And people say ignore it. So if you've only got the one, and you can have a heart transplant, you can have a lung transplant, you can have kidney transplants, and we have hundreds of people on waiting lists to get a kidney transplant. It's like, you should focus on the brain too. Probably a bit more so, because it's the one thing that cannot be replaced. So, left brain. This is not the greatest picture, but it was a review sheet. Left brain is very serious. Left brain cares about language and logic and linguistics and logistics and lists and many other things that start with the letter L, none of them which are coming to mind. Left brain loves to learn. Left brain is sitting here right now saying, is this interesting or not? And left brain helps you remember it. Left brain loves math and Sudoku and wants to know how things work, and left brain is not very fun. Right brain is like this toddler. Hands are covered in paint all the time, and right brain cares about my feelings, not your feelings. Mine. Mine. Right brain is kind of a preschooler. Like, they care very deeply about everything, especially how it pertains to me, because left brain is in charge of time and keeping track of that, and right brain is 5 and doesn't know how to tell time. It cares a lot about instant gratification. It wants things right now. It's like, I want the cookie right now. Dinner's in 10 minutes, but now! So right brain is the section that is most inclined towards addiction because of the instant gratification. Yes, David?
So does that mean procrastination largely comes from the right brain?
In part. That's an interesting situation. It kind of depends on the motivation. That's a very good question. Does procrastination come from the right side of the brain? the part that wants to have fun right now rather than work on the paper, that's very much a right brain. But the anxiety, so for me, I'll often procrastinate because I know once I start, I'm going to put my heart and soul into it, and I don't want to fail, and I want to come off as smart. That's a very left brain thing. So if you're procrastinating because you want to go to the movies instead because that's more fun, that's right brain all the way. But if it's like, no, I need to be the best I can be, that's very left. Does that make sense? Did that answer the question?
Yeah.
Very good. So there you go. Thank you for being an example. Keep asking questions. It's great. So right brain cares a lot about instant gratification and my feelings. And I don't feel good right now. I want to do something right now to fix it. And so addiction that says, hey, I know dinner is in 10, 15 minutes, but you want this cookie? It's like, yes. If the child doesn't know how to do something else, like what does the parent usually do? Go play with your toys. But I want food. I know. Go play with your toys. No. Distraction. Yes. Learn how to wait. But right brain doesn't naturally know how to do it. It doesn't naturally do that. Then prefrontal cortex, which is just behind the forehead, it cares a lot about your feelings. So the things I'm going to be talking about, you might connect with it because right brain says, that happened to me. But then prefrontal cortex might read these things and like, I think this is what my friend's going through. I'm going to be sharing some stories about myself and some people I've met over the years, and you may or may not, connect with them. That's your empathy from the prefrontal cortex. So there's logical thinking, doesn't really care about people, but it wants to do the best. There's creativity and emotions and instant gratification and my feelings, and then there's caring about other people. And we're not talking about the hippocampus and amygdala today. So who here has seen the original Spider-Man movies? Yeah. So for those of you who haven't, and I'll refresh you, God bless you, Spider bites Peter Parker, and you zoom in and you see the DNA, and it's firing, and it's going, and it means he's becoming a human spider. Well, it looks a lot like neuron pathways. And it's like, if this is the thing you see, like an apple, and it keeps the doctor away. Or apple. A Garden of Eden. Apple. I can't bite them because of my braces. Apple. Fruit. Apple. Whatever. Our brains make pathways. And very much like, practicing a scale. The more and more you do it, the more naturally you will do it. The more and more you think on a certain thing, the more easily your brain will start to do that. That's one of the reasons why later on in life, people say sort of a throwaway comment and it means everything to us. It's shattering because our brain has had so much time to think about this one thing, and that triggered it and started the ball rolling. Now, we're going to pretend these waterways are pathways. There are milder pathways, there are deeper pathways. So for example, let's suppose you have a crush on somebody, we'll call them B, I don't know. And B heard it was your birthday, and they gave you a stick of juicy fruit gum. Like, so now you're thinking, of course, juicy fruit gum, you're gonna think about B forever! And then the next day your best friend says, hey, I've got some juicy fruit gum, you want some? Oh, yeah, so there's juicy fruit gum friendship, yay! And then maybe you'll use your allowance and you'll buy some juicy fruit gum. Juicy fruit gum, many options, whatever. Then you get situations, and notice how it's like, oh, my one true love, future B, and then there's my friend, and then I'm getting it, whatever. This isn't really set. This can be reprogrammed, if you will. You can get a shovel and dig somewhere else. Then you get this bad boy. And to me, this kind of represents me and the dentist. Yeah, when I was a kid, I had a very rough dentist, and I always got very, very bad news. And then it would be a cavity, and that would hurt. And so then as an adult, because that happened at a very young age, it grew and grew and grew and kept being reinforced. And so then as an adult, I graduate college, and I go to see this new dentist. I'd heard they were very gentle, and I had a panic attack while there. She's just checking the teeth, and I'm just sitting there sobbing. And she's like, what's wrong, honey? I'm like, you're going to tell me something bad. She's like, I'm just looking at your teeth. You have no cavities. Yes, I do. It's like, no, you don't. I'm always told I do. This is what always happens. And So for me, because it had been very, very upsetting, and I had been very young, it was a formative moment, recurring moment in my life. So now when I hear dentist, it's like, ugh. But because we understand that we can gradually do things to make a new pathway, my dentist and I, Julie, we've been talking about, okay, what are ways we can put big, hearty stones in front and make a dam? And not just make a dam, how can we form a new river? Because you can't just not do this thing. You need to come up with something else, which is why when I stopped self-harming for a while, eventually I inevitably returned to it because I didn't have a different coping mechanism in place. So with things like this, you need a newer way. Now, all this to say, these don't have to be bad things, like juicy fruit gum, yay! Dentist, but it can also be good things. I've got many, many rivers running in my head, neuron pathways, that have been set there by people who have made me who I am today in a good way. I've also got a couple neuron pathways that are just horrible things. But the point is, like, the more formative they are, or the younger they start, the deeper it'll get, which is one of the reasons, side note, why alcohol and other things like that is really dangerous to have when you're at your age, because there's this word called neuroplasticity. Basically means brain flexibility, where since you guys are still on the young side, I know, but your brain is at a very influential point in your life where, because less has happened, things matter more, including and especially chemicals. So when you introduce things like alcohol or self-harm or sex or other things that can make trenches regardless of your age, because you're at this age where your brain is hungry for knowledge and hungry to be formed, the more likely that it will be very, very deep. Side tangent. All right. Who can tell me what is a trigger? Anyone know? Probably saw it on Facebook, #triggered. No one has seen this word? Okay. Yes.
Something that causes you to do something else, usually bad.
Something that causes you to do something else, usually bad. That's a good thought. That's part of it, yes. Was that a hand, or are you just stretching?
Kind of like an activator, kind of. Activates.
Very good.
Emotion in you.
Yes. Let's say an activator, and you can be very susceptible to reacting in a certain way. And it could be good or bad. In psychological terms, it's a stimulus, such as a smell, sound, or sight, that triggers feelings of trauma. People typically use this term when describing post-traumatic stress. They dropped the disorder. It's not PTSD anymore, it's just PTS, which is funny because that's the acronym of where I go to school. And I agree. So I'm going to say trigger, but this is not quite the right word. We're going to awaken some neuron pathways that are in your brain. These are all safe, neutral pictures that it's very likely at least one of them will invoke some sort of response. It might be a noise like, or it might just be a visceral, inside physical feeling. But this is just going to kind of explain, kind of illustrate what it means when something happens that, kind of activates a neuron pathway we already have in place. Okay, ready? All eyes. Great. Yes. Wait. Ouch. I got my finger. My finger is turned. All right, next one. This is the one that made my mouth water. Yes, this one there. So that's what a trigger does, which is why I don't show any bloody pictures and why I don't do any slicing movements on my arms. And for the rest of this workshop, I ask that you do the same. You can, strike the air if you need to, but this place needs to be safe. Because just like people are like, or whatever, for such neutral pictures, people can experience physical pain when they see cuts or burns, especially if they have done it to themselves. So people ask, why does someone even self-harm? There's been much discrepancy, and it's a very controversial topic, and I am here to tell you today, as the authoritative knowledge person on the subject, it depends. It really depends. I'll read a couple examples shortly, but the three things that I've found to be present are three kinds of traumas. There's the first wound, what I call the expressive wound, and then the self-harm wound. Most books just talk about, something happened and then they started self-harming. I'm like, this one's very, very important, the expressive wound. And yes, we will be using teddy bears from here on out. The first wound, something happens. Could be abuse, intentional or unintentional. Sexual, physical, mental. Parents, 9 times out of 10, they want to do right by us. But if they're not dealing with their own stuff, it's going to spill out onto us. My parents, they didn't know how to take care of their mental health, and they taught me how to not take care of mine. They didn't mean to. They loved me very much. They did the best they had, but they didn't have a lot. There is one side thing. If an adult is doing sexual things to you, it's abuse. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter how much they say they love you. It's abuse. Talk to an adult you trust. Get help. Get out of that situation. It could be something not abusive at all. It could just be life. You could have lost someone, a death, a fight, a move. It could be loneliness. There could be just adolescence. You could have a predisposition to depression and anxiety like I did. And I had other factors in too. But there's usually something specific that happens, or just the buildup of time of stressors and, various stimuli that kind of qualify as the first wound. And if you speak to self-harmers or you yourself know people, sometimes you say, this thing happened, or it's like, well, I don't exactly know when it started, but eventually I looked up and... Then there's the expressive wound. This could be something that the self-harmer experiences or witnesses. So, and again, I say this is one of the most important wounds of all. You went to somebody and they laughed at you, or they ignored you, or misunderstood, or maybe even punished you. Or maybe you saw that happen to someone else. If you have siblings, how did we learn the house rules? Well, we saw our older brother mess up, or we saw our younger siblings, or we did, and that's sort of how the siblings learn what's expected in the family, because the others mess up and you get the time out or the spanking or whatever. And the same thing can be said true of the expressive wound. You could see, as a kid, as kids, we don't learn how to differentiate well. We might see our older sibling yelling and calling mom and dad a poopy head, and we see them get spanked or put in timeout. I'm like, they did a bad thing and they got punished. Okay, if I tell them that I feel really, really bad and sad all the time, I'll get punished too. Now, they're not the same thing, but when you're young and as you're forming, you don't really learn how to tell the difference. It also doesn't help that, sometimes there's family culture. We don't talk about Uncle Jerry. Or don't tell anybody that we had the electricity turned off. Don't tell anyone at school. Don't tell anyone we had to go to the food bank. Don't tell. So there could be a explicitly told, I don't want to hear what you've got to say, or it could just be a culture of we don't talk about this sort of thing. And I mentioned on Thursday, I'll say it again briefly, the church usually doesn't help a whole lot because it's often misinterpreted to think, if you take medication, you're not trusting God. If you're having a hard time, you're not trusting God. That's not what it is. That's not the case at all. But we often believe these things, and we don't always do what we believe, but we will believe what we do. I'll say it again many times. We don't always do what we believe, but we will believe what we do. So if we live in a world where we don't talk to other people about our problems, we will grow to believe that we can't talk about it because we're already not. We will become alone and we'll think, I deserve to be alone, so I'll stay alone. And then we become isolated. So the first wound and the expressive wound, they could be two separate events. They could be carrying over time. It could be the exact same thing. It kind of depends how young you are. So for example, as a little kid, you might be told, don't be a crybaby. It's like, the cookie broke. As a 5-year-old, that is everything. As an adult, I'll still be pretty bummed out, but I can buy a new one if I break a cookie. But if a 5-year-old breaks the cookie and it cannot be replaced, this is the worst thing ever. Don't be a crybaby. It's not a huge event, but it has a lasting impact. You're too sensitive. We don't talk about that. Man up. This is one of the worst things. Like, guys in the room, I'm so sorry this happens to you more than us gals. We're expected to be emotional a little bit, but frequently when you guys show humanity, you're told to man up. And that's so unfair, and it's so unhealthy. The main point between the first wound and the expressive wound is the future self-harmer learns no one is listening to me. Whether that is ultimately true or not, that is what we learn. Now, a little bit more about the self-harmer. They're emotionally in tune, but pretty inarticulate. The self-harmer, they're usually the go-to friend. People are often kind of surprised, like, so-and-so is doing this? I would never have guessed. They're just so nice and so kind, and they've got great friends. Well, yeah, they are a great friend, but they don't know how to let other people be friends to them. And much of that is because of the expressive wounds. They don't know how to talk about their own feelings. Now, they wish they could, and it's this fascinating thing. Many self-harmers, as they grow up, if they survive, they frequently go towards helper positions. They might do medicine or psychology. I haven't met a single adult self-harmer who did not know an awful lot about psychology for a nail technician or whatever. They just love psychology, and they know how to ask you the right questions to help you get in touch with what's going on with you. But they don't know how to turn the table so they can be listened to. And if you ask, they probably initially wouldn't even know where to start. That's no one's fault per se. It's just similar to me. It's like I just didn't know how to do this. I knew instinctively how to help other people, but I didn't know how to accept love back. And this is pretty common with self-harmers in general. Now we get to the self-harm wound. Self-harm is an addiction, but it's expressive first. I don't ask self-harmers, why did you cut? Because honestly, I still don't really know. But I know what each one said. I know what this burn said, or that cut said, or this slap across the face said. I know what they meant, which is different from, why did you do this? I'll talk a bit more about the cycle and show some examples, but the basic mindset is I'm about to burst. I know I need to get this out. And one of the ways we know that is because we've helped our friends get it out. We've seen it help. But no one's listening to me. Now, this might not actually be true fully. Like the first person, I consider my expressive wound. I had someone I looked up to who was an adult. They hurt my feelings really, really badly. And I went to them and said, hey, you really hurt my feelings. This is what happened. And years later, when I approached them again about it, they're like, yeah, I felt so uncomfortable and I didn't even know what to say. I'm really sorry. But the point is they laughed at me. Now, when you're 14, 15 and you're bearing your soul and you're shy and you're bearing your soul saying, hey, look, this really hurt my feelings, and they laugh at you, even knowing now that they didn't mean any harm, they just had no idea how to respond to this teenage kid. And I didn't talk to anybody else about it. Now, had I gone to somebody else, said, hey, they really hurt my feelings, I'm pretty sure that, the next person I would have gone to would have listened. But frequently, the expressive, the no one's listening to me, they might have tried, but then they stopped there. It's like, I'm not going to put myself through that again. One of the things I say is if you need help, scream until someone hears you. Don't stop at number one. Keep on asking until you get the help you need. But self-harmers, generally, they don't know how to do that.